welcome. This is the first time I'm doing this podcast via Zoom, and I'm pleased to be joined by Darcy Stamp. This time we had to take a bit of a break because of COVID restrictions, and so I'm at home. Darcy's at home in his studio. And just real quickly, so Darcy is a classical crossover violinist. He's performed and recorded with a wide range of artists, including Josh Groban, George Canyon, Tyler Connolly from Theory of a Dead Man, Johnny Reed, Dan Davidson, Trinity Bradshaw, and many others. He studied at the University of Toronto under David Zafer. Did I say that right?
Correct. Yeah.
And he's toured extensively throughout the US, Canada, Europe, and the UK with groups such as Fiddlers GP and Calgary Fiddlers. So clearly, Darcy has been around the block a few times. It's great to have you on the podcast, Darcy.
Thanks for having me. Yeah. The wheels are turning faster these days.
So I can't remember the first time that we met, Darcy, but I probably got to know you a little bit better after you you were part of a program that the Calgary Airport was working with, and we'll get into that in a minute. But I like to just sort of start with maybe the beginning in terms of how this started for you. I love to hear the history from a musician standpoint. So when did you get into playing, and how old were you, and why did you get into it, and that kind of stuff?
Well, I started the violin when I was 5, and I don't know exactly why I chose the violin, but apparently I was given the choice of taking up any instrument, and I chose the violin, and the rest is kind of history. But I studied at the conservatory here in Calgary, and I was in the Calgary Youth Orchestra and the Calgary Fiddlers, and when we got into my teenage years, we did a lot of touring with the Calgary Fiddlers. We did a lot of the US, and we've been to Scotland 3 or 4 times, and Europe and Hawaii. And so that was kind of like a professional experience as a teenager, right? So when I turned 18, there was a professional version of the Calgary Fiddlers that came to be, which was called Fiddlers GF, which later became a group called Barrage. So all of a sudden, this thing I'd been doing my whole life anyways, touring with my buddies and playing music, and now all of a sudden we were able to make some money doing it. And it was like, well, this is the best thing ever, right?
Right.
So because of that, it's kind of just become my whole life ever since. And after Fiddlers GF kind of faded away, then I went back to Toronto and studied with David Zafer there, and did some stuff like the U of T Opera and U of T Chamber Group. Did some theater shows in Vancouver and Calgary at Stage West and Arts Club Vancouver. And then, kind of settled back in Calgary and did a lot of freelancing with a lot of country artists, because, if you're going to play in Calgary, you got to have a fiddle in the band. And, as a violinist in Calgary, that's kind of a lot of the gigs you get called for, is to play some fiddle music during Stampede, or there's a big Celtic scene for a long time in Calgary, so that was part of that as well.
So has it always been about the violin and the fiddle, or did you ever get into anything else?
It's always been about the violin and fiddle. I've played some mandolin and tried to sing some harmonies at one point or another, but that was more just so I could get more work as a violinist, not because I had a passion for the mandolin. It made me a more well-rounded musician. And
right. And for those of us that are maybe less versed with the industry, so crossover violin, describe what that really means.
Well, that kind of came to be more so in the last 10 15 years or so. There was either classical violinists prior to that or fiddlers, right? And as the world genres started to collide a little bit more classical violinists started playing world music and pop music and jazz and film scores and stuff like that. So that genre itself kind of became the crossover genre. So it was kind of classically based instruments that were doing non-traditional
Okay.
music. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I've heard you on stage playing AC/DC on the violin.
It's been known to happen now and then.
um, Now, one thing that I'm always curious about. So you said you started playing at 5, and sounds like you were on stage from a very young age. I've got daughters that are they're dancers, but one of them, and well, all three of them have been on stage a lot. But my youngest was part of the Young Canadians at Calgary Stampede, and she was dancing in front of an audience at the grandstand, with 10,000 people when she was 7 years old. And I always feel like that's got to have an influence on you and I'm curious if you feel being on stage really sort of, did it impact your confidence? Did it how did that sort of shape you as you got older?
Oh, absolutely. Like, especially, being able to do those shows so young. With the Fiddlers, especially, we were in the grandstand show a number of times, and performing for large auditoriums, and small groups busking and little pub shows. So you kind of got used to it. Didn't matter if you were connecting with 6 people in a pub or 10,000 people. You were as comfortable with your instrument and performing and doing that kind of thing. So
Mm.
that just gives you a level of comfort, I think, on stage. Like, I'm probably more comfortable with a fiddle in my hand than I am on Zoom with you, right? Like, this is a lot less. This is more out of my comfort zone than getting up at the Saddle Dome and playing. So
Well, and do you still get nervous at all, like getting on stage? And is it truly any different on the
it,
Saddle Dome versus the pub?
it's excitement. I think the only time I would say I get nervous is if there's somebody I know that's in the audience that I particularly care about their opinion and their feedback and stuff like that. That would be when I get nervous. Other than that, it's just excitement.
Yeah, right on. So you've lots of things touring, lots of stages you've played on, big stages. Um, any particular memories that really stand out from your career? Could be a particular performance, could be somebody you played with, could be a misadventure, like anything that really jumps out at you and think of standout
Uh,
memories.
well, when we were touring with the Calgary Fiddlers, there's a legendary violinist called Mark O'Connor, who was a Nashville session player for like the early 90s. And he played on like thousands of records, and that's how kind of we got to know him. And then he kind of delved into a more classical, I guess what was the first crossover music, but it was more fiddle Americana. So he was writing symphonies
Hmm.
for orchestra that were based on folk music.
Oh well.
So he became a big influence. And when we were in the Fiddlers, we actually toured and got to do a joint show with him. And that was probably one of my favorite memories from performing.
Hmm.
And then as I got older, you mentioned the Josh Groban thing. So I got to perform in the orchestra with Josh Groban for a show in Calgary and in Edmonton at Rexall. So that was a pretty cool experience, just to have that rush of
Yeah.
20,000 people, cheering. It wasn't for
Yeah.
me, but it was,
Sure it
but
was.
it felt like it, right?
It was partially for you.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. Um, any really strange places that you've played? It's always sometimes when I'm talking to a folk musician or somebody that's you know there's all kinds of clubs and some interesting places. But any really unusual places that you might have played?
Through touring and stuff, there was a lot of, like, I wouldn't say strange places, but sketchy places. And dive bars and hotels you'd rather not remember and stuff like that. But as far as strange venues, like the airport has to be
Yeah,
initially the strangest one I thought I'd ever play.
yeah. Well, why don't we segue into that a little bit? Um, because you probably started playing there. It's probably not quite 2 years ago that whole program started. Um, we were involved with the airport right from day one. So I know we put out a call for artists. Is that where you heard about it, or
Yeah,
how
I
did
think
you hear about the program?
I know it was through Stagehand, but that may have been. I think I had done a couple things through Cornerstone with Jim and Sylvia there that I
Right.
think through Stagehand as well, and that's probably how I came to hear about it. But
Okay. So for people that aren't familiar with the program, just tell us a little bit about what the program was at the airport, and what your experience was.
well, the airport offered. I think it ended up being like 8 slots a day.
Yeah, it started
I
out
think.
as yeah, it started out as one or two as a bit of an experiment,
Yeah.
and then just based on popular demand, they started to open up additional stages and additional performance spots for artists. So yeah, it ended up being on average probably 150, 160 performances a month, which is pretty active, very active for an airport. So yeah, so you got it. So you heard about it, and they did auditions actually because they wanted to meet you and see how
A little bit
comfortable
of
you were. And
quality control, I would think, right?
right, right. And
um,
what?
go
So
ahead.
what was it like? What was it like when you first went to meet them? Because I mean, let's face it, it's not. This is not playing the Saddle Dome or your
No,
traditionally
no, for sure.
prestigious venues. So what were you thinking when you were going down to audition with them?
I was thinking, what the heck am I doing? Like I was driving to the airport, and even then, still trying to talk myself out of it because it's like, you know, I'm a real musician. I'm an artist. I make a living doing this. Like, why am I going to the airport to play, kind of thing?
Right, right.
Um, and then I met Peggy and Jocelyn, who were facilitating the audition at the time, and they walked me through, and I did a little 20-minute set, and I was like, this is really fun. You know what I mean? Like the airport was, I think it was like late November, maybe, or October, and the airport was really busy.
Hmm.
And, within 5 minutes, I drew a crowd of, you know, 20, 25 people
Hmm.
um, who really wanted to listen. And, you know what I mean? Like lots of times you're on gigs that people aren't necessarily there to see you play. Lots of times
Hmm.
you are and you're the ticket and stuff, and lots of times you're the background music and stuff like that. And in this venue that I thought I would absolutely be background music, that wasn't the case at all.
Hmm.
So I think that just it brought a good feeling and connection with people, and it was great.
Yeah, it's a really different. I've been to the airport a number of times and seen multiple different musicians play, and it's unique because it's a very high traffic area. Most of the time, although I know many of the stages were post security, so you actually had to clear security to play. Um, and I my experience was that once people were through security and they know they're going to make their flight, they can kind of relax a little bit and take their time. And so yeah, and I can't remember the number of passengers that would go through the airport in a regular time. Obviously, it's changed dramatically since COVID, but they would see about 18 million passengers a year. So you would see thousands of passengers potentially in any given day. And I know one of the things that's unique there is that the audience is perpetually changing. So
Every hour, right?
yeah, every hour. So yeah, um, which made it, as a musician, I know that a number of musicians would play three, four, five, six plus times a week
Yeah.
because again, it was new audiences all the time.
Well, and
Um,
for me, it was like, well, I didn't know where else I could go and perform for people at 8 in the morning and actually have an audience. You know what I mean?
right.
It was incredible. Just that only happens during Stampede. So
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, I
pretty good.
remember you saying that your wife, I think, is a teacher, and so she's up and gone in the
Yeah.
morning, and so you're right. What other musicians are working at 8 o'clock in the morning?
Yeah.
So just tell me a little bit more about the experience. You talked about, kind of unexpectedly drawing a crowd when you went for the audition. I know we've talked also just about connections that you've made, and I've heard from many musicians just unique and interesting and sometimes really touching stories. Um, can you tell me about those? Any stories that stand out for you from the airport?
Yeah, like there was a while where I was going, I would say 4 or 5 times a week. Um, and it would probably be almost every shift or every other shift, something interesting would happen, whether it was, an emotional passenger had a real strong connection with the song I was playing, or I was doing a lot of covers at the time that people would recognize. And, you know, not everybody that's traveling is in a happy place all the time too, right? So,
Hmm.
people were emotional about the loss of a loved one or something like that. And I would happen to play something that triggered that or that they would make a request to hear. So that was always really nice and made you feel like you were meant to be there at that time and play for them. And
Hmm.
that was pretty cool. And then there was also, just fun and strange experiences too. Like, Ron McLean and Lanny McDonald catching their plane to Grand Prairie or somewhere for hometown hockey and stopping in and, chatting for a few minutes and, or,
Yeah.
I've had some dancers while I've played. Some of them, were like professional tango dancers that just started dancing while I was playing, a Libre tango. Um, and there was just like interpretive dance sometimes of people that would just, you know, kind of do their thing.
Yeah.
So
I Christina was one of your fellow musicians. Christina Coline used to play at the airport a lot as well. And I remember one time I was there, and there was a gentleman who was on a long layover. I think it was about a 4-hour layover, and he danced without a word of a lie. He danced for about 2 hours while she played. He was wet with sweat. Like he was just one of those. Initially we were kind of watching this, going, "This is a little strange," and then you realize he was just having the time of his life, really enjoying it.
no, it was cool,
So
and like it was so great to meet all those other artists too. Like we didn't play at the same time, but you always cross paths. Like I
yeah,
remember seeing Christina every morning, and you'd kind of have a little chat and a coffee, and or
yeah,
James and Justine, and it was great.
yeah. So so as a musician, maybe for musicians that haven't had this experience, which would be most, what are the uh, you know I guess the value to you, like you said, your initial thought as you're driving to the airport is like, what am I doing? This is not what I should be doing. Um, but can you just talk about the benefits, let's say, like what were maybe some of the unexpected benefits to you as a career and accomplished musician for playing in a really unconventional place like an airport?
Yeah, like I think the hesitation at first was maybe partially a monetary thing as well. You know what I mean? Like you don't know how it's gonna work out and all of this kind of stuff. But as I got into it and did it more, it didn't really matter what the monetary portion of it was, although that was worth its value as well. It was more I could have these connections performing for people at
Yeah,
8 in the morning or 4 in the afternoon or whenever, right?
yeah,
I could sell CDs and product, and people can take that memory home with them to wherever they're from. Lots
yeah,
of these people were from the States or Europe or wherever, and they got to take a piece of Calgary art back with them, which I thought was pretty cool.
yeah,
Uh, and
yeah.
yeah,
That's
just
that's
the relaxed environment of it, I think, was a lot of it. That you could go and perform without the stress of performing.
right. Right.
or you could just go and be yourself and try out new things and try new material and see what worked and what connected, or you know what you wanted to improve on. It was
Right. Right. I mean, just to give people a bit of a sense, I mean, the airport, and I, I've talked to a number of different airport programs, and in for Calgary's case, they allowed the artists to leave in your case, the violin case open and accept tips from the audience if they, so chose, and like you say, sell merchandise or CDs. Um, and so that, I guess my observation was that that really helped. Like that made a material impact on your compensation as a musician. And I was always um, heard so many different stories about, sometimes like you say, you touched somebody and somebody leaves a big tip, but also when I'm watching musicians and there'll be somebody who's coming in from the tarmac with a coat on with a blaze orange or whatever, and he walks by with his coffee and drops $5 in the case. So it really, I think people just genuinely appreciated the fact that there was this live experience happening that they enjoyed and wanted to show their appreciation. And so um, yeah, I don't. Did that ever feel awkward to you, or?
um no, not awkward. I had never really done any busking and stuff, so it was a different feeling, I would say, but it was just, you knew people were doing it from a place of support for the music, as opposed to, there was no condescending
Right,
vibe to it at all. And, the employees, whether it was WestJet or the tarmac guys or whatever, like they all loved the music as well, right? Like I had WestJet, baggage employees that hired me for weddings, and you know, there was just random stuff that never would have came my way otherwise if I hadn't been out there performing at the airport.
right. Um, so just think here. So we talked about kind of the value to you as a musician. Um, why don't we move on from the airport and just talk about like how long have you been a professional musician now? How long has this been for you now?
Well, I've never really had another job, so as far as professional, since I was 18, so we'll just say, well, a while. Um,
Yeah.
but I've played for 30 years, and it's been my profession since I started, I feel like.
So things have certainly changed, I think, in the music industry over the years. I don't know if you've seen it as, in your genre and the fact that you're playing, whether it might be for the theater or as a session musician and those sorts of things. Have you noticed a significant change in the music industry during the course of your career? And if so, what would be the big changes?
Yeah, I'd say, live music is the one that's seems to suffer the most.
Mm,
And my elders said that from their time to my time, right? So like things from the 70s to the 90s to now just seem to be getting slower and slower as far as live music goes, and there's less places for young people coming up to learn to play and learn their craft and all of that. And it's it's sad, but things like the airport kind of prove to you that it's not a financial thing. You know what I mean? Like people are willing to pay a small cover charge, or lots of times more than they would ever pay for a ticket price, just because they enjoyed what you were offering there for an hour, right?
right.
So like I don't think it's necessarily that people aren't willing to pay for it, I think it's how they want to receive it.
Yeah. Well, and that's again, I think something that's unique about the airport is you wouldn't normally expect to see it there, and it's sort of a welcome surprise. And I've had people that have come to visit, and somebody was playing in the airport, and they're like, "Wow, it just completely changed the feel of my experience of coming to the airport, and changed my impression of the city. If I hadn't been to Calgary before, and I'm greeted by a talented violin player as I get off my plane, it immediately leaves a mark on my impression of this city as an artistic city, and I think that's a very healthy thing. But I'm curious as to, you talked about how live music you feel has probably suffered more than other areas of music.
As
I've
the
got
venues have, like I think it goes hand in hand. But
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, and I'm curious why. I've got some ideas as to why I think that may be the case. But what do you think is driving that? Why don't people get out and enjoy live music as much as they used to?
I don't know. Like I think part of it in Calgary is the layout of the city. You know what I mean? Like everybody lives outside of downtown and lives in the suburbs, and once they go home, it's hard to get people back out again. Like
Hmm.
I spent a number of years in Toronto, through university and afterwards, and I was playing 6, 7 nights a week. Like some months I would play like 28 days straight,
Wow.
and they weren't all great gigs, and they weren't all, but they were all live venues.
Hmm.
And I think there's just smaller communities, pools of people. Like everybody has their neighborhood, and they all have an Irish pub, and they have a jazz bar, and they have all these live venues that people see value in.
Mm.
And it's not that they don't see it here. I just think it's not close enough to them, or the access isn't there for them.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you think that's particularly unique to Calgary. I know in Montreal, I've got two daughters that are at McGill in Montreal, and I think Montreal has three universities in the downtown core, so they've got tens of thousands of students, which completely changes the vibe of the downtown. But you talked about Toronto as well, and Calgary. There's no question our downtown core is not nearly as populated after the business crowd goes home as other cities. But so do you feel that this is unique to Calgary, or is the whole live music, the challenges associated with live music, is that
Well,
a
it seems to be
broader
everywhere,
industry
but
challenge? Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't come up with the solution yet, or we'd find a way to make it happen. But it's not for lack of trying. Like
Hmm.
there's some fantastic venues in Calgary, like the Ironwood and Cornerstone, and that are in, some of them are in the small communities that are bringing artists out and getting some crowds out. But it's
Right.
tough.
I think my observation has been that the fact that we all carry an entertainment device in our pocket, and you know companies like Netflix and Apple and Amazon now spend billions of dollars on programming, and it's very easy to cocoon, particularly during a pandemic, or when it's cold outside, which both of those things are happening for us right now. It's pretty easy to just stay home and not have the same impetus to get out. But it's interesting because every time I do get out, I'm always, I don't know if amazed is the right word, but just it's such a pleasant, it's so nice to get out and hear it live and interact with the musicians live. And then you mentioned a place like the Ironwood where, there might be 100, 150 people in there in a night. And which means that not only you're interacting with the people at your table, but potentially with Pat or the musicians in between sets, and it's just a very different experience to watching, you know, the latest episode of Breaking Bad
Yeah.
on Netflix or whatever it might be. Um, so let's now. I didn't ask you before. Do you write any of your own music? Are you a writer?
Don't. No, I love to collaborate a lot, and
Yeah,
create art with other people. But to me, it's that part of it isn't a solitary thing for me. I need to do that with other people, and
yeah,
I maybe that's a violin thing. Like the violin takes a lot of isolation just in technical practice and stuff like that. So that by the time that's done, it's like I just want to work with other people, and
yeah.
so whether it's arranging or producing, and um, I've been doing a lot of that through the pandemic as well, just kind of remote work,
Okay.
um, which is you know
So tell me about what we're here in February 2021, and the pandemic has been raging for about a year now, and obviously live shows have been shut down. What what have you been up to? The airport program got shut down very early, so it really has been a difficult time for live music, certainly. But tell us a little bit about what you've been up to during the pandemic.
just trying to stay creative more than anything. You know, I'm an optimist for sure, so I always think we're coming out of this, but I keep saying that, and we're like a year later, and so I'm optimistic that we'll be seeing the end of this soon. But in the meantime, I'm just hoping to have something to show for it. So,
Right.
been working on an album of instrumental stuff, working with musicians kind of all over the world, and learning some production skills and mixing it myself and mastering. And I have a do duo project with Alex Hughes. You probably know Alex,
Hmm. Hmm.
called Bell Cabin. So we released a single in the summer. And then we're actually working on a Christmas album for next year at this time.
Okay.
So now's a good time to, have the time to fit that in. And so that's fun. And then I was just actually awarded a grant with the Alberta Foundation for the Arts.
Oh,
So
great.
we've been able to commission Johnny Summers
Right.
to write a work for solo violin and jazz orchestra. So that's going to keep us busy for probably the next 6 months or so. And then hopefully we're back performing and can premiere it next season. Great.
Very cool. So what do you, if you kind of look at your crystal ball, I mean, obviously this has been a pretty hard reset for in particular, the live music industry. And there's lots of concern about music venues' ability to carry on, to get through this, and lots of advocacy going on, and that sort of thing. And people have moved to live streams, and you've talked about collaborating. I'm just curious if you've have any um, thoughts, ideas as to what will be the lasting impact of the pandemic. Will um, what will endure after we're all back, and this is hopefully a distant memory. Any thoughts as to what might fundamentally change as a result of this experience?
Well, I think there's been some good that's come out of it as well. Like thinking of the remote work, and, like the fact that, you know, I produced a Christmas track for Bell Cabin, and I thought, man, it would be amazing to have James Turillo, who plays with the Lincoln Jazz Center Orchestra, play guitar on this.
Hmm.
So I sent him an email, hey, and 2 days later I had tracks back from him, and I mean, so like stuff like that you would maybe never reach out to whoever it is you want to work with, and that's kind of become commonplace now that we're all working from home, so let's all get together and create something, and that's
So it's almost like it's been a big leveler in some ways that just made everybody a little bit more accessible. We're kind of all in the same boat, and so hey, why not step outside, the norm and do something different? That's
Yeah.
cool.
And live
I know.
streams too. Like I don't see any reason why those need to stop.
Hmm.
Uh, because you can reach globally that way,
Hmm.
and that doesn't mean it shouldn't happen from a live venue like the Ironwood or wherever we go back to performing live. But I think you should still keep streaming those and selling tickets to those, and you know,
Right. Yeah, and you're right. It's interesting when we've done a number of live streams, and some of the folks that really seem to appreciate it are often the people that are listening from somewhere in Europe or in Mexico, and the fact that there's no longer this physical barrier. I can hear a show from the Ironwood even though I'm thousands of miles away. So yeah, it does make it more accessible, and it'll be interesting to see how that evolves, because I could see very much a hybrid type environment where um, you don't necessarily need to be just there local. Um, I'm wondering if you have we've talked a lot about you when you're on the stage, but I'm sure you're somebody that appreciates music, other people's music as well. Any particular shows that you can remember that were like, wow, that was amazing? So as an audience member now, anything that really stands out for you?
um, I saw Yo-Yo Ma live once,
Hmm, hmm,
and that was like I that changed my world. I think,
hmm,
um, I just he was playing the cello, obviously, but all of a sudden I knew what I wanted to sound like on the violin,
hmm.
and it was just a real spiritual kind of moment.
Well, that's
Like
cool.
there's lots of performances that are amazing and big productions and exciting or virtuosic and that kind of stuff, but it's pretty rare that you have those moving kind of performances that you see that kind of hit you in the heart.
Right. What about mentors for you? Is that I mean, as a musician, you do a lot of things on your own. You've freelanced around a bunch of different places, but anybody that's really been a bit of a big influence or a mentor on you throughout your career?
Yeah, I've been lucky enough to have a number of them, kind of throughout my career. When I was younger, David Zafer, who's um, a great Canadian pedagogue, and has students all over the world performing in great orchestras, and um, I can still remember every lesson I had with him. It's always kind of triggering in the back of your mind, and um, there was never anything looked down upon by him in music as a violinist. Like a lot of the classical community at the time, if you were studying other kinds of music, they weren't as supportive as that for that. But he was always, you still got to play in tune, you still got to play in time. You just, it's a different genre, but you know, it takes the same skills.
Right.
So and then Dave Pierce, growing up,
Mm-hmm.
we were a few years apart in the Calgary Fiddlers and stuff, but we spent a lot of time touring together. And then I kind of interned with him as he took over music for the Grandstand show, and I learned a lot about production and arranging, and how to run sessions and all that kind of stuff. Dean Marshall, he ran the Calgary Fiddlers for 2 decades, and you know he's probably one of the biggest mentors I've had on the violin as far as improvising and teaching, and just working as a professional.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Cool. Um, what about the I always like to ask a question about the unsung heroes there, because oftentimes music can be, about the front man, front person, the person in the spotlight, the Yo-Yo Ma's of the world. But we all know that there are thousands of unsung heroes in the scene. Anybody that comes to mind for you in that regard, at least in the local community?
Um, well, just people that advocate for us
Hmm.
that aren't necessarily musicians or artists, or maybe are but don't do it professionally, but like yourself and Stagehand and Dan Duguay, and I work with Pat McGannon in PM Gigs and
Hmm.
Corey Mack, and they love artists and they love what we do and they love promoting us, and
Hmm.
we're not always the best at doing that ourselves, so it's nice when there's people that are willing to do that.
Cool. Well, we're kind of coming to the end of our time here. Is there anything in particular that you maybe wanted to talk about or cover that we haven't had a chance to touch on yet before we start to wrap up?
No, I'm curious where you see Stagehand going through this after coming out of the pandemic, and yeah, I know
That's
things have
a
changed a lot for you too, right?
Yeah, actually, it's a great question. It's there's obviously been a lot of uncertainty, and we've always focused on trying to bring the arts, and in particular, over the last few years, music to what I'd call non-traditional places you might not expect, and that really did start to take off for us at a place like the airport when, with in a very almost unexpected way, by using technology, we allowed them to do something that they probably wouldn't be able to do otherwise. I mean, it's a lot of work to book 150 gigs, and so it was obviously disappointing when that shut down. We were also working up at the Edmonton airport. They were doing a similar number of gigs, and I was actually down in New Orleans launching their music program from their airport in March of last year when everything really started to shut down. So um, it's really pretty unclear as to when that's going to come back. I was actually speaking with Jocelyn from the airport this week, and they're still down 85% in terms of traffic. There's obviously still health concerns that they need to be mindful of, and they've been very impacted financially as well. So it's this whole pandemic has really rocked their world. Now that said, I believe, as we talked about, with sort of an unconventional business model where it's really kind of like running a live music where the audience is paying a large portion of the artist's compensation. Um, it's almost one of those situations where you can make something from nothing, and because the venue itself is valuable. So long story short, I'm not sure when the airport stuff is going to come back. I know they want it to come back. It's just there's so many things just way beyond our control. But we'll keep our ear to the ground on that one, and continue to aggressively pursue that. Uh, Interestingly, I think that street performance will make a resurgence. Particularly as the weather starts to warm up, because it's safer to play outdoors, and we're working on some projects there that would help to facilitate that. And as you've already talked about, the airport was a bit of a street performance gig. It was almost like a busking gig in some ways. So we'll probably explore that more. I'm doing a lot of work with some local live music venues right now. We're doing some stuff with Chinook Blast where we're doing some live streams because we really can't do any in place events. So we're going to be live streaming from some closed live music venues. So yeah, we'll continue to iterate, and I think focus on these non-traditional venues that where the arts and music can really improve the experience of customers. So if you think of where that could be, again, all of this is post-pandemic I'm talking about, but airport we talked a bunch about, but um, places like even hospitals, seniors homes, malls. I mean, retail is really struggling now as well. I mean, they need to improve the experience and provide unique reasons for people to go down to the mall instead of order off Amazon.
Yeah.
So that's going to continue to be a big focus of ours. and we're iterating on continue to build the product every day. So it's yeah, that'll probably be the main focus, is those non-traditional venues as the pandemic starts to wane, and we have an opportunity to hopefully impact the experience that people have at those places where you might not expect to see a talented musician. You got any
Thank
advice for me?
No, I just my appreciation. Thank you for for
Well,
vouching for us.
well, it really is my pleasure. I've this is kind of a second career for me, and as I mentioned, I've got three daughters that are artists, and my oldest was actually just she's in New York, and there was an article in the New York Times about something like, oh, I can't. It was the New York Times, and they were talking about how ballet and dance had moved outdoors, and so there's a picture of my daughter, and there's the Empire State Building in the background, and so it's yeah, that's kind of where this started for me. So it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to get to know folks like you, um, and see the impact that you make, whether it's on a big stage or whether it's in an airport. So we appreciate what you do as well.
Thanks, Derek.
So I'll let you go. Why don't we wrap up with that? I appreciate you taking the time, and
Yeah,
let you get back to recording or whatever it is that you're doing. And I really do look forward to seeing you on stage again sometime soon. Let's hope that that's sooner rather than later.
me too. Thanks, Derek.
All right, take care.
All right, talk to you then. Bye.
Bye now.